Here with Charles Goodson. He's one of the organizers for Dallas Organizing for Change. Said he's been working in it for about 5 years, and we're going to learn more about that. And then next to him we have Deputy Chief Hale, who's the commander of the South Central Patrol Division of the Dallas Police Department. He's also a faculty member of several colleges and universities.
And isn't he currently the head of narcotics?
Currently the head of narcotics.
Wow. Yeah, I was getting it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We also have Carmen White, who is the Administrative Chief Prosecutor of the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. Ms. White received her law degree from Harvard, and she also graduated cum laude from Baylor.
Baylor was harder, right?
And she's now with the District Attorney's Office, and Susan Hanks was to come today, but she got sick, so she sent Carmen White to help us out here. We also have Marion Brown, who's from the Sheriff's Department, and she's a Dallas person. She went to public schools here, and she graduated from the University of Texas in Arlington. And she's been working in law enforcement since 1988. She doesn't look that old, does she? She was also the first African-American female police officer in Dallas.
Really? In Duncanville.
In Duncanville, okay. And now we have John Fullinwider, who is a co-founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality. He is an educator and community organizer with more than 35 years experience in Dallas, working with a wide range of issues, ranging from lead pollution to homelessness. And let's see, I'm cutting these down real fast. Next we have Walter Changa, Higgins, a longtime organizer for police reform, community development, and racial justice in the African American community. He's the founder of the newly formed Dallas Police Reform Organizing Project, whose mission is to reform unjust, discriminatory, and racially biased practices and policies of the city of Dallas and Dallas Police Department. And he's also worked for the disproportionately affect low income and people of color.
All right. So I think you would agree that we have a really good panel tonight that should be able to give us a lot of information and background. I'm going to just make a brief statement about how we're going to work this tonight, so bear with me. The subject that we're exploring tonight is very complicated. I've actually spent quite a bit of time researching this and was able to determine the players, and these are them. Anyway, who are currently involved in moving Dallas law enforcement and our various minority communities towards a more harmonious relationship. I've worked at narrowing down the issues so we may all leave tonight with better understanding of our problems and the solutions that we're looking for. In doing so, I might not visit every issue that you might be interested in, but if there's time, we'll give you a chance to answer questions. I'm thinking there may not be time, but we'll see. However, the topic is large, the questions are many, and I'm appealing to our panel members to confine their answers to specific questions and to formulate their answers not to broad statements, but rather to the specifics of the questions asked. And I will have my hook out. Okay. And so tonight I'm going to also, since we are taking video, when you speak to the audience, if you would be sure to keep your voice up. So when we put this on YouTube, y'all will be heard. Okay? Okay. All right. All right, we're going to start off, actually, from this side of the panel. Mr. Goodson, your organization, the Dallas Communities Organizing for Change, did a study entitled A History of Violence, Uncovering Excessive Deadly Force in the Dallas Police Department. And it covered the period from 2002 to 2013. And now you've released a follow-up study which gives more disturbing facts concerning officer-involved shootings of unarmed people. Can you tell us what prompted your organization to research this issue, and briefly what the findings were that prompted you to issue the complaint, and what your subsequent filings are?
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me to be able to speak here before you.
Yeah, let's stand up and speak out.
Okay, stand up.
Yeah,
Oh,
that'll help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity and chance to speak before you. I represent an organization called Dallas Communities Organized for Change. As she did mention, we did release a report called The History of Violence. Okay, and how that initially got started, we were told about, or we experienced rather, Tobias Mackey, a 25-year-old father who was shot down by Officer Matthew Tate. Okay, also, when that happened, a 9-year-old child was also shot, Xavier Collins. The date of this happening was on October 29th, 2010.
Okay, Charles, I don't want to interrupt you, but we don't have time for a lot of specifics, so can you give us the broad picture of, you heard all these things and so you decided to check into it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So basically, what initially started us, it was a murder that happened, and basically when that murder had taken place, we kind of started us in doing some research and doing open records requests, things of that nature, to find out exactly what was going on here with the city. And we found very much so many contradictions that we're bringing out now currently.
Okay. Well, based upon this report, in November 20th of 2014, your organization filed a complaint against the City of Dallas and the Dallas Police Department with the Department of Justice, seeking withholding of federal monies until the systematic police misconduct is remedied. Can you tell us what the status of that complaint is?
Yes. Status of the complaint.
Can you stand and talk louder?
Sure. I'm sorry. The status of the complaint, of course, the Department of Justice is currently investigating it. It can go on for an indeterminate period of time. What our position is that we desire for specifically Eddie Bernice Johnson and others to support the DOJ federal complaint. Our desire is also that federal monies, as you stated, should be withheld for the specific purpose of making sure that excessive force and things of this nature, violation of a person's rights would not be taken advantage of.
Now, when you were looking at these statistics, did you find that there was a disproportionate number of Black Americans that were represented in the pool of police shootings?
Yes, ma'am. What we found is that there were over 58 people that were murdered by the Dallas Police Department between the time period of 2002 to 2013. Of those, 42 were unarmed individuals. Of that, 26 were African American here in this city.
So these are statistics that have been verified through open records, and actually now with your subsequent report, you took it from the police department's website itself. Is that correct?
Correct. And what we found is that our records are on point with each other. What the chief has released and what we have documented through our open records requests are on point. They're in line with each other. So that's our position.
All right, thank you. Deputy Chief Hale, before the Department of Justice complaint was filed, Chief David Brown had made a series of policy changes that started back as far as August of 2012. Can you give us a brief outline of those policy changes that were made and what's happening today?
Well, certainly we likely started before 2012. That's when it began to get traction. But just to name a few off the top of my head, of course, we had the foot pursuit policy, which has been controversial among officers.
Louder.
We had the foot pursuit policy, which is controversial among officers. We've had the post-traumatic stress incident recovery, in that instead of only 3 days off the street, which was a complaint of many community members, now officers are off the street for about 30 days as they recover from these traumatic events, providing all shooting info on a website, which he just mentioned, with all the information, the most transparent on earth, not just in the state of Texas. Replacing the entire defensive tactics staff at the police academy and replacing primarily with supervisors that can have oversight or better oversight of what our folks are learning and being taught. Revamping the entire training process itself within the academy, and then issuing 2,250 tasers. Previously, we had about 350 tasers for all 7 patrol divisions, and officers checked them out and checked them back in after each shift. Now they all have them on their person, just in case that option is available. And then, of course, now we're working on body cameras.
Right, cool. In September of 2014, the Dallas Police Association proposed a 10-point plan for, quote, a much-needed reforms, including changes to the use of force policy and speeding up of internal affairs investigations. The association has alleged that the plan has gone almost nowhere and that morale is the lowest it has ever been. Can you tell me what the process is to review submissions like this, and what is the status of the review that of this particular plan that was submitted?
First of all, we got to understand that the Dallas Police Department is the 8th or 9th largest in the country. We don't have one police association. We have at least 4 or 5. And so, that being said, the DPA certainly is the largest, but many times they have competing interests. And trying to get all of them to agree on one thing, just because one association presents it, doesn't mean that's what everybody wants. And so, that's part of the issue. And so, that keeps things from flowing so quickly. Second, the process depends on a lot of variables. Who does it include? Is it within our purview? Does it have something to do with the DA's office or the sheriff's office? Some things we can't just change arbitrarily within the police department. Third, there are association reps typically on every internal committee within the police department. And so they're always able to get their voices heard anytime they want. In fact, they've got all of our phone numbers. I get calls at 2 in the morning from association members, so it just depends on what they're asking and who's involved on how that item will flow.
All right, thank you. So, I mean, you are taking into consideration these reports and these plans that are presented to you from the various associations.
In fact, Chief Lawrence has stood up a permanent committee. It will be a permanent committee, and they're trying to work through these and get everyone to agree that
Okay,
something that
actually,
everybody.
that's coming up as one of my next questions. Since Ferguson, additional measures have been taken by the department, specifically the Dallas Police Community Support Coalition. Is that the group that you're referring to?
No, I'm talking about an internal,
internal
committee of all the association
Okay,
ranking
great.
members.
Okay, well, we have this Dallas Police Community Support Coalition that, gosh, the list is very long in terms of the number of the people that are involved, the individuals and the organizations. How were these groups or individuals selected to be represented on this coalition?
But first of all, we tried to get a cross-section of leaders and influencers from every demographic we could think of, from community groups, from religious affiliations, from special interests, ACLU, whoever that may be, and so income levels, and we tried to get an extremely broad cross-section of the city of Dallas, which we know is a big city. And so there's over 50 people on this committee, as you stated. And so that's kind of what we did, and we believe we got every cross-section and demographic covered. If we didn't, then certainly you can contact Mr. Sean Williams, our community liaison, and see if there's a cross-section that is not represented, or Chief Lawrence himself, who chairs the committee.
Okay. Can you tell us about the specific committees that are formed on this coalition of people that are in the areas that they're looking at?
Well, broadly, I hadn't been to all the meetings, but we've got a deadly force use of force committee, we've got a youth committee, a mental health and homeless committee. Well, actually, there's one committee. These are all subcommittees from that committee. A policy committee, a recruiting committee, a training committee, and all officer well-being committee.
Okay, listening to the Officer Well-Being Committee, are any of the police associations represented on that coalition to be on this Officer Well-Being Committee?
I think what first has to be understood is that these folks are tasked with the chief's intent is we've got 3 silos, right? So you got cops and what we want. You've got you, the community, and what you would like to see. And then you have us as management and what we think is right, correct? So those don't always line up. And so the chiefs, I believe, my understanding of the chief's intent of this committee is to get community input on what you think should occur. Not what the cops think, which is what the association's job is. They already have committees, and they can always give their input. And so the intent is to get communities, also get the associations, and get management attorneys and all those other folks involved, and have all three of those pieces of information to come together to come up with a cohesive policy that works for everybody. And so if you've got the associations in the community meeting and obtaining that information, plus giving their own committee and doing whatever they want, at what point do you have just the community's opinions?
Well, you indicated that there was an internal organization that involved all of these police associations.
Certain.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And they actually have a voice within the police department where they're being heard. Is that correct?
In addition, every committee that I sit on, so I was on the policy committee this last month, for instance. Every committee that I sit on, I physically request from every association what input you want on this policy. So we looked at foot pursuit and taser. I said to every organization, send out an email, give me every single thing you want in or out of this policy. And I provide that to the citizens who are on this committee. So they've got the association input there. They've also given their list to the chief. And so I believe they have an opportunity to hear their voice, no matter what. In addition, we brought police officers into those committees to answer questions from the end user.
Okay. Are you aware of the report that was generated by the DCOC, Mr. Goodman's group?
Yes.
Okay, have any of the committees within this review coalition actually been tasked with looking at that data and using that as part of their
I actually do not know. I would assume the Deadly Force Committee may have it, but I'm not certain.
Okay, so you don't know for sure.
Correct.
So we don't know at this point. Would you say generally, in terms of the actual report statistics, has anyone in the police department looked at that, and do they agree or not agree with the report that was put out?
Well, certainly we've looked at it. In fact, I have it right here.
Right.
And so certainly we can't get into specifics because obviously we're under a lawsuit. But I can tell you from an academic standpoint, and he cleared up some of that just now in his presentation. So some of those things we were worried about is, number one, we have to clean that data. And so how many of those are unarmed, which he just answered. Of those that are unarmed, what was going on at that time? Was there an altercation? And so I think we have to get down to the true innocent, unarmed people versus those involved in crime and other things. But at the end of the day, it all has to be sorted out, and certainly we have to do better as an organization that has community dialogue.
Okay, because looking at that report, it was actually quite long, and it was very specific. It took very specific incidents and actually summarized what happened. And now this subsequent report that has come out specifically deals with the new information that has just become available to them, I guess, from the website regarding unarmed people that were involved in officer-involved shooting. So this is something new that you all are actually adding to your reporting, is that correct?
Is what we're adding to the reporting? I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
That you are now reporting not only the incidents, but you're reporting whether or not the victim, if we want to put it that way,
Certainly.
was armed or unarmed.
Certainly, all of that's available on the website.
Okay, all right, thank you. Chief Brown instituted a policy whereas officers involved in shooting incidents have 72 hours before they are compelled to make statements. Can you explain the reasoning behind that policy?
Yeah, and this one gets real confusing for folks. Okay, there are actually two separate investigations. Actually now maybe three if the attorney's office starts there, right? So first thing we have to do is separate those. So when an officer is involved in a shooting, there is a criminal investigation. That's why it goes to a grand jury. We do not, in the Dallas Police Department, some departments do, they try to make a determination, is this a good shooting or not good shooting, and then determine if they're going to refer it to the grand jury. We do not do that. 100% of our shootings has and always, in my entire 24 years, gone to the DA's office to the grand jury. Every shooting, whether we think it's good or bad, is irrelevant, right? That's the first thing. It is a criminal investigation. For instance, an attorney with the Bar Association said that this is an ordinance, the 72 hours. It is not an ordinance. It is called the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, An officer has a right to remain silent, just like any other human being in the United States of America, in the criminal portion of the investigation. So once we compel them to speak, which is a garrity, is administrative portion of the investigation. So yes, I can order them to speak administratively. Once I do that, I can't use that information in their criminal investigation. Does that make sense to you? Okay? So it's two separate deals. And so, for lack of a better term, as a negotiation, rather than have an officer say, I'm going to remain silent, which is their right, which is what any shooting suspect's attorney tells them to do, they've agreed to speak after a cool down period. So that's one portion of it. They have a right to remain silent and don't have to tell us anything that day or 72 hours. So we have to make sure that's clear. Secondly, which I saw in none of the studies, there is science out there that says your coherent and accurate statements come best after at least one full sleep cycle. At least 48 hours, because they're not sleeping typically right after those critical incidents. You can look at force science, you can look at the IACP, International Association of Chief Police, you can look at PERF, and so certainly we need to have studies anytime we do an academic study and look at the science behind both sides of the issue. And I'm sure there's science on the other side as well. But this is based on science and based on the Fifth Amendment, not a city ordinance, not DPD policy, because they have a right to remain silent.
Hey, I read a rather extensive study that was put out by the FBI that really delved into a lot of things you're talking about. Number one, that after a traumatic incident, anyone involved in that incident has a trauma that they are going to have influence their psyche and how they're going to respond.
Certainly.
That speaks for having a delayed interview.
Correct.
However, they also point to the fact that a lot of times the real specific things, those little details, can only be found out after an immediate interview, and that victims of a police shooting don't have the option of not being questioned by the police.
The victims of a police shooting?
Yes, or the people that witness this.
No, if you shoot a burglar at your home, you do not have to answer my questions. Your attorney can advise you to remain silent.
Okay.
That is your right. That is in the Bill of Rights, folks. So that is not something I'm making up.
So do you advise all your witnesses to anything like this that happened, or the family or anybody else, to not say
It's
anything?
not witnesses. We're talking about suspects in criminal cases.
Now I'm talking about witnesses.
Correct.
Now I'm talking about witnesses. The people that you rely upon to give you information about what happened during this event. They're not given the option of waiting 72 hours before they answer your questions.
And neither are the witness officers.
Pardon?
Neither are the witness officers at a shooting.
Okay.
Only the suspects, just like in any other crime. Only the suspect, just like in any other crime. You have a right to remain silent. They give up that right, but it's also not completely accurate that they don't say anything until 72 hours. And so they don't take a sworn statement for 72 hours. However, the first responding supervisor there has to get something from them. So they don't just show up and shut up. They have to at least say, okay, vaguely, what occurred here? I had a guy commit a robbery. I think he had a gun. I shot. Okay, go sit down. And then they get their attorney and a peer officer there.
Okay,
And
so you're saying that is a regular thing that happens, that the supervising officer, when he gets there,
Correct.
does take a statement.
Not a sworn
Not a
statement.
sworn statement, but does take
Just
a
a general
statement
idea of what occurred. Yes,
from the officer that was involved.
correct.
Okay, because that's in fact what the article that I read from the FBI recommended, is that you get those statements right away, and then you give people time to sleep and recover,
Exactly.
and then you go back and get those sworn statements.
Certainly.
Okay, Charles, your organization actually filed an ethics complaint in response to this 72-hour review policy. Can you tell me what the basis of the complaint was and what happened as a result of it?
Yes, most definitely. We filed an ethics complaint against the 72-hour review policy. The reason for that is there was an incident that happened in Pleasant Grove with Bobby Bennett, and an officer by the name of Carter Spencer, because of a video that's on YouTube, had been found to say incorrect information, and immediately after that, let's say about a week or two after that, the chief then implemented the program of the 712 policy. We felt that it created special interest for officers and the city at large, that it kept them liable for any incidents or excessive force, or pattern of excessive force that they have been using. And so because of that, that's the reason why we filed the ethics complaint, because we felt like it protected the interests of the city versus protecting the interests of the citizens.
Okay, what happens when you file an ethics complaint?
It goes to an ethics advisory committee, and the hopes, of course, is to gain a public hearing. As it relates to what happened with ours, it was just simply, it didn't pass the ethics advisory commission committee's level, because they felt that they didn't support our position. But our position was very valid. It was based upon what specifically happened in the case of Bobby Bennett and what immediately happened thereafter with the implementation of the 7-2-hour review policy.
Thank you. And we're going to turn to Chief Marion Brown and talk to the Sheriff's Department. Can you tell us what the racial makeup is of the Sheriff's Department, in that Dallas County is 39% Hispanic, non-Hispanic white alone is 31%, non-Hispanic black alone is 22.2%. So we've got a real diversity within the citizens of our county. Can you tell us what the makeup of the Sheriff's Department is?
Certainly. I pulled some statistics from the Sheriff's Department, HR Department, and what I find is that we have 47% white, 36% African American, and 16% Hispanic employees.
Okay. Is in your hiring practices, is race or ethnicity ever considered in terms of keeping a balance within the department?
Well, let me say this. Obviously, we want to have diversity within the department. We want our agency to reflect the makeup of the community. However, because we are a civil service organization, our hiring is primarily based on testing standards. So we go out and we recruit in communities. We try to attend events happening throughout the community, whether they are in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. We try to go to those events and recruit, because again, we want our agency to reflect the entire community.
Okay, thank you. Does the Sheriff's Department keep records of officer-involved shootings, similar to what the police department does?
We do, and I would hope that any credible agency would maintain that information. And I also want to say that we had an opportunity just last week, as a matter of fact, to contact Representative Eric Johnson's office and let him know that we do indeed support his House bill that he is recommending to be pushed through legislation right now, which is basically where he is promoting a clearinghouse, if you will, so that when something happens, an officer-involved shooting, let's say, we are required as an agency, we have a limited amount of time to notify the Attorney General of the fact that that incident has occurred. We have to let them know all of the details about the officer as well as specifics about the victim in that shooting.
Okay. Do you have, since the whole uproar around Ferguson and all of the protests and all of everything that's been happening since then, has the Sheriff's Department initiated any specific programs?
No, we haven't initiated anything.
Have you had any real incidents that were real controversial that would have come up in terms of officer-involved shooting?
No, we haven't.
Okay. Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask is, we've heard that the police department has a very low morale because of a lot of what's going on. Does the sheriff department have any problem in that regard? Or are y'all all happy campers?
Well, oh how we wish, oh how we all wish. In whatever organization you work within, there's going to be morale issues, if you will. You can approach one employee and say, how's the morale? And that employee will say, oh, it's great. I love working here. Everything's going great. And you can approach another one and they say, this place really bites the dirt. This is so I can't speak to the morale of the Dallas Police Department, but I can simply say that within our agency, I am certain that there are some folks who would say that we have morale issues. And we try to address those because we want our employees to know that we're concerned about them as well. Because if we have good and, as you say, happy employees, then we know they're going to do a good job out and about in the field.
All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Is it Fullinwider? How do you pronounce your name?
Just call me John.
John. All right, John.
End up, John.
This is John. Okay, John. Mothers Against Police Brutality started in Dallas after your co-founder Colette Flanagan's son was killed in a police-involved shooting in 2013. Can you tell me, has your organization moved beyond just a protest over this shooting, or are you taking on larger issues than just one incident?
First, let me say it's a pleasure to be able to represent Mothers Against Police Brutality here tonight. And let me just thank all of you for being here and for being Democrats. Look, most people don't believe, and they don't want to believe, that the Dallas Police Department shoots unarmed people. Most people don't believe, and they don't want to believe, that the Dallas Police Department shoots mentally ill people to death. And most people don't believe, and they don't want to believe, that they shoot mentally ill people and unarmed people in the back to death. And when they do this, every time they've done this for the past 40 years, the shooting has been found to be justified. There has been no indictment since the guy that blew Santos Rodriguez's head off in 1973 was indicted. There's been no indictment in a fatal shooting by a Dallas police officer in 40 years. So this is a situation, we started after Clinton Allen was killed, but the Clinton Allen case illustrates quite well some of the problems with this, with the problem of police violence against the public. Clinton Allen was shot 7 times. 25-year-old unarmed black man. He was shot once right here, as if his arms were raised, like 6 witnesses said they were. He was shot 5 times in the chest. He was shot 1 time in the back. When the emergency team arrived, he was laying on the ground in handcuffs. So was he shot in handcuffs, or did Officer Clark Stoller put a dead man in handcuffs? Now, of those 7 shots, the only one that was within 3 feet, a close-range shot, was the shot in the back. So where's the life or death struggle? When did this officer quit fearing for his life? After the first 2 shots? After he'd shot him 4 times in the chest and he had to hit that 5th shot in the chest? Or was he finally not afraid for his life? It's too bad Clinton Allen's not alive to say what his side of the story was.
Well,
it's too bad there's no camera there like there was in Jason Harrison's case,
okay, which
they won't release the video, and one of the cameras malfunctioned. So, hey,
what about the fact that PCP was found in his bloodstream and that induces violent behavior in people?
What about the fact that he was shot 7 times,
What
once
about
in the
the fact
back
that
at
he
close
attacked
range?
the officer who had bruises
The
around
officer
his
said
neck,
he was attacked.
and he went to the hospital with bruises on his neck. So are you saying that this was an out-and-out, as it was reported from your organization, an execution, as opposed to an incident where there was actually an altercation? And
You can interpret it. You can interpret it. I've got a white officer. I've got a young black man. I've got 7 shots, 1 at close range in the back. Interpret it like you want. The person who can tell the other side of the story is dead.
Okay, well, this was brought to the grand jury, am I correct?
Like every other shooting since 1973.
Okay.
And it was found to be justified.
Okay, and are you questioning the validity of the grand jury?
Yes, I am. In fact, I wish I could go to Las Vegas with those odds. Hundreds of shootings, many of unarmed people since the 1970s, and every single one justified. Every one. I mean, ask yourself that.
Okay, I agree with you that does bring questions to mind. Having served on 5 juries, grand juries, in the last 5 years, I have a little experience with grand juries, and I know that very specific information is always brought before the grand jury. The grand jury has the opportunity to actually subpoena people and to ask questions, and we don't take the job at all lightly.
Have you ever served on a grand jury for an officer-involved shooting?
I have.
Well, the grand jury that heard Clinton Allen's case didn't subpoena any of the witnesses to the shooting, and there were 6 of them.
Okay, my understanding is that there was a report given by the defense attorney that had all those witness statements in it that was submitted to the grand jury, and that's common practice, that the defense attorneys submit
Well,
their
it's common practice
version.
to no-bill every police
No,
officer that
but
killed
let-
someone in Dallas
Well,
County for
but
40
You're
years.
saying they didn't subpoena anybody, but my question is,
They
were
didn't
not
subpoena
those-
anybody.
were not they presented with the information from these witnesses
Sure,
in the
but they
reports?
don't want to hear from any
don't
witnesses
wanna
that
hear?
contradict the police.
I would beg to differ with you on that.
Well, you
Okay.
can differ with me,
All right.
and everyone on this
Okay,
panel
so now
can differ
you-
with me, but the fact
Okay.
is, there have been no indictments.
Okay,
And this is a pattern across the country.
okay.
And the fact is that for the past 30 years at least, we've had this same debate. I mean, the first case I ever worked on was the Santos Rodriguez case. And I worked on cases straight through in the establishment of the first Dallas Police Review Board.
Okay.
That year we had 26 shootings, 13 of them fatal. By 1987, per capita, Dallas police killed more people than any police department in this country. They did it for 2 years running. And that included every big city in the Chicago, New York, and all of them.
Okay, well,
And so
nobody,
this department has a history. And because Dallas is so good at co-opting everything and presenting, hey, Big D, how'd you guess? This story isn't really known to most people. And it
Well,
won't
that's
be
why-
known to most people
that's why
if
we're
they...
here tonight.
Well, that's fine.
Why
I'm
we're
just-
here tonight.
But I know, but I mean, I'm sorry to get argumentative with you. But what I'm saying is, if you want to debate it, then we can debate it. But I am putting out there that this is a history in Dallas, that we have a history of killing many people, many unarmed people, and no officers are held accountable for it. And even the officer that shot Santos Rodriguez, the closest thing we had to shooting a saint in this country, a 12-year-old boy shot like this in a police car, he served less than 5 years. And the Attorney General Griffin Bell under President Carter couldn't see a civil rights violation in that. And what most people don't realize is that that same officer had shot a black kid to death 2 years before. And he was found completely justified at that. So they are not like a suspect in any other murder. If you arraign them, throw them in jail, and then they can have the right to remain silent. But when you put them right back out on a police car after 30 days or whenever, like you did the killers of Jason Harrison, they are not like a suspect in any other murder. And even if they were, if you're still their boss, just tell them if they don't talk or if they lie, they lose their jobs. Well, we couldn't do
All
that.
right, well, thank you, John. You are certainly a good representative of
Well, as the only Republican here, I felt like I should.
How can you be a Republican?
Just kidding.
Let me just okay. Can you tell me, we're talking about the issue of needing reform and the relationship between minority communities and law enforcement. Obviously, there's a critical issue. I don't think anybody, as hearing what we're hearing tonight, would disagree with that at all. But I'm also wanting to know, are there any organizations formed related to just working in the area of reducing crime in the communities where these shootings frequently happen?
Well, according to the city manager, last June, we have 1,095 crime watches in Dallas. So there are people working on crime prevention in every part of the city.
Okay. Can you tell me what the ultimate goal of Mothers Against Police Brutality is?
Yes, we want to change use of deadly force policy to attempt to end the killing of unarmed suspects or persons in custody. We want to change the training officers have when they're dealing with mentally ill people so that they quit shooting them and start talking them down like they often do to white mentally ill people. And we want to help the youth of this city become part of this city and not have to be afraid of the police. We'd like to help restore the trust between the police and the people they're supposed to protect and serve. But right now, the the social contract in Dallas and throughout this country is bloodied and broken by police violence against the people. And that is a true fact. And I taught school for 15 years in an alternative school in high school, and 95% of the kids I taught were black and Latino. And I am well aware of the alienation that young people, especially young people of color, feel toward the police. And actually, people of color generally. We did a survey at Kwanzaa Fest. We interviewed 491 people, and we asked them this question. I'll just do one. We asked them, do you feel comfortable calling the police when you have a problem? Over 30% said no. Have you ever felt personally treated unfairly or felt threatened by a police officer? Over half the people we talked to said yes. And it went downhill from there. And what I'm saying is the level of alienation caused by these shootings, and not only in Dallas, but across the country, is much deeper than the public relations department for the police department here would want to admit.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to Deputy DA Carmen White. She's standing in for our new DA, Judge Susan Hawk. There's been a turnover in the DA's office as a result of the election in November, and of course everybody's is looking closely to see what's happening there. Can you tell me, has the racial makeup of the DA's office changed since Judge Hawk came into the office and took over?
Well, obviously, Judge Hawk has been in office for now, I guess, going on 2 months. I would say the DA's office is good and it's functioning, and you in Dallas County can be proud of what's happening at the DA's office. The diversity at the DA's office, I would say, remains steady. Judge Hawk has promoted within the DA's office, and I believe it is as diverse as it has been. I've been at the DA's office now coming on 14 years, and there's been a change. We've seen diversity grow over the last 14 years. I think Judge Hawk's promise to the community is she wants to make sure that we have qualified prosecutors doing the job that the citizens of Dallas County require us to do, and I believe she has kept that. And the great thing about that is that over, I won't say the 14 years, but we're 50 years of the march in Selma, and we've come a long way. I'm not saying we're there, but we've come a long way, and I think the diversity that is going on in our office, that is great, that we can finally link the idea that quality and diversity can go together and don't have to be separate. Judge Hawk has promoted diverse people in the office. I made promotion in the office over these last 2 months, and other people are diverse. So I would say the office is diverse from top to bottom at the DA's office.
Cool. At the end of his term, Craig Watkins set up a new division in the DA's office, which was to have a prosecutor and investigator available to send to all officer-involved shootings. Can you tell me the status of that unit and how it's functioning?
Yeah, so at the end of the last administration, that was proposed and I think it's set up. And so the good news is that department, that unit is up and running. It is called our Civil Rights Unit. It is working in conjunction with our Public Integrity Unit. And so we do have a prosecutor staffed for that unit, and there's an investigator, I believe, staffed for that unit. And so it is up and running. The good news is the prosecutor who is staffed for that unit is an experienced lawyer. He spent time as a prosecutor. He's also spent time as a defense attorney. He has great perspective from both sides, and so it is in good hands.
Since that division or whatever that entity has been formed, have you actually gone out and investigated any shootings?
I don't believe they have been out. I don't know, to be completely honest with you, but I don't believe they have been out yet on any officer-involved shootings. I think the Civil Rights Unit is just getting up and starting. The lawyer who's hired for that position is just coming on into the office, and I think he's been there maybe a few weeks. And so I did have an opportunity to sit down with him today before coming to talk about the unit and the formation of the unit and their plans for the unit.
Okay. Can you explain the process that follows an officer-involved shooting in terms of how it's investigated and how potential charges are handled through the grand jury system?
With the new unit or in the past?
Well, now,
Okay,
because
so.
we've got the police that we've explained, they've explained the two different avenues. Now we've got this unit.
So-
But what happens in terms of the DA's office, you know, it goes before the grand jury. So what I guess I want to know is that how that all process works.
So, as of the new formation of the Civil Rights Unit, there will be, as he said, there were 2 investigations and now there will be 3. So our Civil Rights Unit will run what we call like a parallel independent investigation along with the investigation is handled by the police department. The lawyer and the investigator who are part of the Civil Rights Unit will be the same team of people who will take it from investigation to through the process of the grand jury. And so that will be handled within one division.
And can you just explain, I have, as I mentioned, I've served on 5 grand juries, so I'm pretty familiar with how they work, but most people have not. Can you explain how a case makes its way through the grand jury and say, let's take an officer-involved shooting, and just take that as a hypothetical?
I'm going to take that as hypothetical, though I'll tell you for the last 10 years, I've been a child abuse prosecutor, so that is my expertise is that. But how any case gets before a grand jury is investigated by a police agency. The police agency files a case with the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office reviews a case to determine if it is a case that we're, one, going to accept as a filing within our office, a case that we will accept to, if it's a felony, take before a grand jury. And once we decide to accept that case in a filing to the office, then it will be scheduled for a grand jury proceeding, and a prosecutor, depending on what kind of case it is, will be assigned that case, and then they will present that case to the grand jury. And an officer-involved shooting with the new unit, we know who that person will be every time. The difference will be, instead of just accepting a case as filed in from the police department, we'll be running our own investigation and making that determination. And it's my understanding that, I think the chief here said that all Dallas police shootings go before a grand jury. I believe that's what he stated, and I believe that's what will happen in our civil rights unit, that they will be taken to the grand jury for evaluation by the grand jury.
Can you just briefly tell us, we know that the prosecution brings information, and there's a prosecutor there that presents the case, or the officer or the entity presents the case to the grand jury. What happens in terms of alternate views? For instance,
whether or not other sides can be heard.
Absolutely.
So, because clearly, I don't know if you all know this, but the grand jury process is a secret process. You would know that, right? That it is kept confidential. And that is so that the decision of the grand jury, so the grand jury can be comfortable in whatever decision that they make. It is correct that a prosecutor brings the case to the grand jury. Oftentimes, a police officer is called to be the witness in the grand jury. Other witnesses can come to the grand jury. If the grand jury requests to hear from other people, defense attorneys oftentimes submit a packet. We call it a packet, and basically it can be letters from witnesses, it can be witness statements, anything that the defense attorney wants to gather to have their side and their point of view brought before the grand jury. The grand jury can request to talk to anybody out there, and if the defendant himself wants to speak before the grand jury and the grand jury decides that that's somebody they want to hear from, then the grand jury can request that that person be brought in so that a full investigation is had by the members of the grand jury.
And just as a former grand jury person, I want you to know that when you're in a grand jury, you're the law. You're the king. You can subpoena. You can ask to talk to whoever you want to. And it doesn't matter what the prosecutors say. If they say it's not worth going to talk to this person or whatever, you can say, well, we don't care. We want to talk to them. So you just need to know that being on a grand jury is really important. Which leads me to my next question, which is that Judge Hawk has indicated that she wants to encourage more diversity on the grand jury. Well, in my experience for the last 5 years, the grand juries are very diverse. But does your office keep statistics on the racial makeup or sexual preferences of grand juries? You know, so that, and how would you promote diversity?
Well, currently, we don't have statistics on the racial makeup and/or sexual preferences of grand jurors, but Judge Hawk has been out in the community. You've probably seen in the paper. She's talking to the community. We do believe that it is important to be transparent and involved in the community and get ideas from the community. And so, because of that, she's hearing people say we need diversity on the grand jury, and so the community is speaking and she is listening. There are going to be reforms, legislative reforms out there worldwide, I mean nationwide, that people are talking about reformation of the grand jury. We are listening and trying to figure out exactly what people are talking about and what they want. We do believe there's great diversity on the grand jury, but as I often say, perception really just becomes reality. Whether it's true or not, what is perceived is what really matters. And I think what I heard him say down low is fairness can be always fair, but perception of fairness may be a different thing. And if people don't perceive a system to be fair, then it won't, regardless of whether it is or not, you will have protests, you will have issues. And so the perception of what the community as a whole, all of Dallas County, and really bigger than Dallas County, thinks about what happens in grand juries and things of that nature is important. Because only when it is perceived fair will people accept it as fair.
How is a grand jury chosen?
Well, you can ask that in a minute, when we're through. Let's hold questions till the end. You have to volunteer, basically.
Okay.
You volunteer. That's how you get there. Okay. Okay, Walter. Least but not last but not least, I should say. You've recently formed the Dallas Police Reform Organizing Project, whose mission is to reform unjust, discriminatory, and racially biased practices and policies of the city of Dallas. When I got that little blurb about you, I went looking for your group, and I couldn't find you. I could only find this type of organization back in New York. They were all over the place. So I'm presuming that you started this very recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's newly formed. It's modeled after the New York Police Reform Organizing Project. It's newly formed and it's modeled after the New York Police Reform Organizing Project that put the big report out about the broken windows policing policy in New York City. So like you said, our focus is to basically, in a nutshell, to be a complement to Mothers Against Police Brutality, DCLC, and other organizations who have been in this fight on the grassroots level by now inviting attorneys, inviting researchers, educators, and other people to the table to be able to dig into some of these policies and to begin to advocate for policies being changed, first on a local level with DPD, with the City of Dallas, also with the DA's office here in Dallas.
Okay. I'm presuming you started this group because you felt like there was another voice needed in the fight, so to speak?
Another voice, but more tools.
Okay.
So.
And so what tools will your organization bring to the...
So our agenda is definitely in line with the other agendas of the coalition. We consider ourselves a part of the coalition with Mothers Against Police Brutality and others. We feel like that there are 4 or 5 key critical things that need to be changed. One of them we've already discussed is the 72-hour policy. We want to advocate for procedural fairness in the internal affairs process that citizens have to, when you submit a complaint against an officer. We believe that there are too many levels of bureaucracy and not enough controls on DPD's end on how a complaint is filed, and also that there's too many burdens placed on the citizens in that process and not enough on the police part of the internal affairs process. Also, the Civilian Review Board. I am a former member of DCLC, and one of the things we did also put out, which wasn't mentioned, was the report about the Civilian Review Board, and we did an analysis of the Civilian Review Board and how it's been around for over 26 years. And it hasn't had many reforms to it, small changes to it, and it's largely ineffective in what its initial purpose was supposed to be. So we feel like strengthening the Civilian Review Board. Also, we'd like to push for, some reforms to the grand jury process here locally. However far we can get with that, working with the DA's office, we'd like to advocate for that. But really, it's policy, it's research. We want to continue to put out reports. We want to continue to put out fact sheets and expose how some of these laws policies are affecting Black, brown, low-income, mentally ill people disproportionately in the city.
You've been involved in a lot of this organization for many, many years, representing your community. Would you say that at this point in time, the police department, the sheriff's department, the DA's department are open to hearing what you guys have to say?
Yeah, definitely. To just piggyback off of what Mr. Fullinwider said, Chief Brown's a great salesman, great guy, right? But he's a smart guy too, and he understands that Dallas is in a precarious position as a police department. When you look at the numbers that Charles mentioned and that you mentioned as well, when you look at those numbers, there are police departments in this country right now that have been under DOJ investigation and have consent decrees on them that have better numbers than Dallas. So we're talking about a police department that that has since in 1987, when the Alpert Group wrote its recommendations to the city, some of those same policy changes were policy changes that Chief Brown said, hey, here's what we're going to implement in 2013. Right? So we're saying in a 26-year period, we're still having that conversation about policy changes in this city. And that's one signal. He's smart enough to know that it's a race now. It's a race. There's been a federal complaint filed. It's a race to see how much they can implement before it gets around to the feds coming in here really assessing what's going on, right? And I think that's a good thing, but I also think that all of these things, if you lay them out and you look at them, it's more than enough. We should be under a consent decree. The Dallas Police Department right here should be under a consent decree right here in Dallas, just based on the inaction over the past 26 years, based on the numbers, how they disproportionately affect Black and brown, mentally ill people in this city. It's more than enough. It was more than enough for cities across this country, and it's time. It's time.
Now, the report you referred to, the Alpert report, actually, I did some looking into that, and this Dr. Alpert is a world-renowned criminologist who was actually contracted by the city of Dallas, I believe, to do this study and this investigation. And as you said, he presented a very comprehensive report. How many years ago?
No, 26.
26 years ago.
Yeah.
And in my reading, I keep hearing that very little happened after that report was submitted to the city of Dallas, who commissioned the report. Can any of you all speak to that in terms of why was this not taken seriously before now? Anybody?
I honestly don't know which recommendations were taken and not taken from that report.
Well, I got a copy of it. It's really long.
Well, I can speak to a couple of things that really stick out.
Okay.
Two things was the foot pursuit policy, which didn't happen until recently, modification of that. Also, in his report, one of the big things he said is there's a lot of training on when to shoot, but not enough training on how to de-escalate and when not to shoot. And that's something that keeps coming up. If we had that kind of training in place, more training, because I hear Chief Brown talk about this training that they do have right now, but we need more of that training. We don't just need racial sensitivity training. We need training to actually start to break down officers' mental models that they have of someone like me. If I take this jacket off, put a hoodie on, put a hat on, we'll be having a totally different conversation here about who I am. So those kind of things, getting at the heart of some very deep structural problems in this country that we have about how we perceive Black people, how we perceive people of color, and how some officers are taking that into their job every day. We know this is a problem. So I think that America is at a point. I think Dallas is at a point. that we need to start having real conversations about how we change that in police departments. We know that officers are more prone to see threat, harm, and danger when they see someone of color, particularly a black person, and will shoot. It's been proven statistically that they will shoot twice as fast. They will shoot someone of color than they will someone who's white. Twice as fast. That's statistical Harvard, Yale study, whichever one. You can get my information, I'll get it to you. But,
Okay.
So.
Chief Hale,
Yes, ma'am.
would you say that your perception of the police department is that they're, as we said, in a race to see what can be changed fast enough before you might have the DOJ looking at you more closely?
Well, certainly that's an analogy he can use. First of all, let me say I'm not from the public relations section of the police department.
You do have one, though.
They do have one. Second, let me say I've never said there's no problems within the police department. I never would be naive enough to say that there are no issues and healing that needs to be done between the police department and the community. That would be ignorant on my part. So I realize that we have healing to do, which is why I'm here. Third, let me say that I grew up in Oak Cliff. I am a black man, in case no one knows. I have 3 black sons in the exact target demographic that is a problem in the country right now. I have 2 black grandsons that are coming up that I fear for just as much as anybody else. And so if you think I don't want these issues resolved, then someone's misguided. So let me say that first. And so is there a race? Well, certainly. The entire police profession is changing before your eyes, in case you haven't noticed that. It changed after Rodney King, and now we're going through that next change with the body cams and other legislative changes and grand juries and all those things. So what the officers are learning today will not be what I learned 24 years ago, and we realize that. And so I don't know that it's erased. I would say that it's evolved, and that we've always got to learn and try to improve. We've always had de-escalation training. Back when I came through, we even had what they used to call verbal judo. So they wanted us to fight with our words and fight you with our words and put you in jail without having to physically fight you. And so there's always been some type of whatever the new science of that day is and trying to keep up with those things. And so we have to continue to evolve. We have to get our communities more involved. And I think that these forums is what's starting that healing process. The reason we haven't had, I believe, the riots, even amongst the folks here, is because we continue to dialogue. And they know that they can call us and talk to us and that we will continue to have these dialogues. Do we have to do better? Yes. Do we have to pick up the pace? Yes. And so, yes, we have to evolve at a better pace. Yes. They say we want a consent decree, but every city that has it, it costs a minimum of $1 million to $10 million per year for that agency. Who's going to pay that? It's going to be you. And so, at the end of the day, and they're going to do the same things that we're doing because, yes, we get those reports, and we try to determine, okay, what can we do better? What did they just tell Seattle to do? Okay, we can do that. What did they just tell Philly to do? So, yes, we can do that. And so not only do we do it, we improve on it, like the website. You have the most transparent police department in the United States of America and likely on earth. I'm telling you that. There is no other police department that has a searchable police report system for the public online. You have to do an open records request. Go to Plano, go to Richardson, go to New York. I don't care where you go. It does not exist. We're the only ones. No one has the amount of data that we have that they were able to do the research on the website. It does not exist. We are the most transparent police department in the United States of America.
Mr. Goodson, would you agree with that?
What I would say is that the only reason why they've become more transparent as of here lately is because of the open records request.
You can't hear me.
Speak up.
What I was stating is that the only reason at this particular time that the Dallas Police has become more transparent is because of the open records request that we've done and the information that we put out publicly, the reports that we put out publicly. So I would say it's kind of late at this particular time, but it's a good thing. This is the appropriate response. But they should have been able to, this information should have been able to be more accessible long ago. We found that from 1988 all the way until this, when they just put this out, that there was absolutely nothing that you could get. So, but we realized it's because of a lot of the pressures that our organization, Dallas Community Organized for Change, Mothers Against Police Brutality, and that Changa Higgins, our formations have done.
I want to say something about transparency.
Certainly.
When the Albuquerque police shot down a homeless man that was camping. They had cameras on that. And even before they charged the officers, and they did charge the officers, the Albuquerque Police Department released that tape. All right? The first shooting, police shooting, and it was a fatal shooting, where the officers wore body cameras in Dallas, was last summer. And it was a mentally ill man named Jason Harrison standing on his porch with a screwdriver, and he was shot twice in the back, and that tape hadn't been released. The police department, of course, has viewed the tape. The officers that shot him have viewed the tape, and they say that the tape supports their story.
Excuse me. My understanding of that is that, in fact, once the tape came out, that these officers were charged.
They were charged. But what I'm saying is the police department didn't hold that tape back.
Are you saying that the
They
Dallas
did.
Police
You mean
Department
they
Oh, the
held
Dallas
it back?
Department, yeah. Well, the Dallas Police Department has not released the tape in the Jason Harrison case, even though the officers are back on patrol. Okay?
So how
The Albuquerque Police Department released that tape.
Which is the first time they had done it as well.
Well, so what I'm saying is, on that one, when it really counted, in real time, they're more transparent than you. That's what I'm saying.
Go get all their shootings for history. If
Okay.
they're more transparent than
All
me.
right. All right, well, we obviously have a lot of
Things we've always done is recruited nationwide, and now we're trying to focus on recruiting closer in the home, and so that we better reflect our communities. And so, but we have to do a lot of hiring. Like I said, we're the 8th largest department in the country, and we got 3,500 officers. So we have to, and we lose about 200 a year. And so that's always, and we only hire 10 to 14% of the people that apply. So in order to get 100 cops, I got to interview 1,000. And so we got to continue to recruit the best. When it comes to tapes, my personal opinion, not the opinion of the Dallas Police Department, so let me get that straight. My personal opinion is that our biggest issue is that we lack consistency. Some of them get released, some of them don't. And these be one or the other, in my opinion. And so if we're going to say they have to wait until grand jury process is complete, then all of them have to wait until grand jury process is complete. If they're not going to wait until grand jury process is complete, then we need to release them all, in my personal opinion. And so, but to answer your question specifically, Texas open records law allows the holding of any evidence in an ongoing investigation, whether that be drugs or shootings or whatever that case may be. If it's an ongoing investigation, there is certain information that can be held back. And so that is just basic Texas open records law. For instance, the police reports that you get online from us, technically we can make you do an open records report and charge you 10 cents per page. We don't do that. That's what the law says we can do. And so we allow that to be open. And so we have to be consistent and do the things that do the right thing every time.
Does the grand jury see these videos?
I assume so. I've never sat on the grand jury.
It depends. There's no hard and fast rule. It all depends upon the case. It depends upon what's being presented by the prosecution and what the defendant would want to have. But I certainly know of situations where videos have been submitted by the defendant or their attorneys that grand juries have viewed. So, but it's a case-by-case thing.
But
So,
you always can see the video if one has been taken.
if there's one taken and we know about it, we can ask to see it. I mean, we being the grand jury. Okay, JC.
Yes. I'm somewhat troubled by the whole grand jury process because it seems to me that there's almost an inherent conflict of interest with the DA's office in there representing law enforcement, while at the same time they have to work with the police department on all other types of cases. So I'm wondering if it would make some sense to have either a special prosecutor or to have a more transparent process in that it should be in an open court rather than handled in simply grand jury process. I think that's part of what's feeding the dissatisfaction in Ferguson is there was no trial, the public didn't get to see the evidence, so the public is still dissatisfied. I think there's a lot of that going on here too. Your comments?
Let me answer the question. Sure. I believe good question. I believe the creation of the Civil Rights Unit, so the idea of that is that we will have, he is a prosecutor, he works for office, but this is the only thing he does. So he won't have a murder case or any other case in which he has to work as a partner, let's say, or as you use the word, represent the police department. He really, this is his only job. And so that does take away, I think, that concern of the parallel. I have to tomorrow call you as a witness in my case when I bring you before the grand jury 2 weeks ago. So his job will be just that. It will be only the interaction from that unit with this particular case. And I think that does, I would hope, as I said about perception, change the perception that we have someone who won't otherwise need the police officer as any other witness, that he will be this, not independent, because he is employed by our office, but someone who this is the only role he plays with police.
And in terms of the grand jury, when you go and serve on a grand jury, you go in there every day and you are hearing between 35, sometimes 100 cases. And these cases they're asking you to see if there is probable cause to have an indictment brought. You're not deciding if it's, if he's guilty or not guilty, but you're looking at whatever evidence is presented to you as to whether or not there's probable cause of a crime having been committed. So I encourage all of you, go serve on a grand jury, because it's one of the most important jobs that we have in our society. Okay, over here.
Honey, you can go. Which one?
Okay, we'll do you lady first.
Is there any hope for the cop on the beat in the neighborhood, by way of getting acquainted with children that could learn not to fear the policeman? I realize the police are, it's very, very hard to think about this, but is there any hope for that? A neighborhood cop?
Well, certainly you have neighborhood police officers. There's only 12 per station, which is never going to be enough. My personal opinion, once again, and y'all shouldn't ask me to come here if you don't want my personal opinion. But my personal opinion is that all 3,500 of us ought to be community police officers. And so I'm now over narcotics and vice. And I have 80 uniformed officers that go out there and do work. And I tell them that I expect them, if they have time in between answering the calls and doing the things that they do, and we're having a midnight basketball with PAL, to go by there and play with the kids as part of your duties. I want you to go interact with our children in these other neighborhoods and not just be doing the bad things and putting bad people in jail, because we can never have that connection without programs like the PAL. And our PAL, we call it the Police Athletic League, which is completely wrong now, because for you that don't know, you need to get your youth involved. They've got photography, robotics, a youth choir, guitar lessons, anything you can think of to try to reach every demographic, because I told them years ago, not every kid is athletically inclined. And so how do we reach those other youth in our city? And so those are the things we're trying to do by trying to reach out as much as we can. Boxing, soccer, anything we can do to make that connection. And we got to continue to make those connections.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was wondering, according to their professional training, when is it acceptable for a Dallas police officer or someone from the sheriff's department to unholster their weapon and shoot? Like, what is the barometer there of acceptable?
Chief, go ahead. You've been doing this long.
Well, let me say that anytime the officer feels that they are threatened, that they fear for their lives, that they can unholster their weapon. The law says that if you are simply doing that to create the apprehension in the individual's mind, then you're okay in doing that. That's not considered a use of force.
I want to say this, that the thing, you can correct me, and I know you will.
Not necessarily.
But it's supposed to be, the officer is supposed to use proportionate force, not use more force than is necessary to apprehend the person. And there's various stair steps, from a word to a touch to whatever. And what happens in several cases that in the past couple of years is that you go from shut up to shoot down really fast. And like in the case of Jason Harrison, I keep using this because I know that case. But in less than, like within 2 minutes of arrival, the guy's dead. And he wasn't committing a crime. His mom had called for some help. And she's standing right there. She's not being held hostage. But what I'm saying is it's supposed to be an escalation. You're not supposed to escalate kind of like ahead of the person of interest. If they're not... it's supposed to be proportionate as you go up. The last thing is deadly force, okay? But I don't know how many escalations you went through to shoot someone within 2 minutes of arrival and they don't have a gun. So that's one thing about deadly force. It is supposed to be proportionate.
Right, and this is what, I don't remember who it was that said it, but someone on this panel talked about how we needed to reach a point where we have training where our officers don't resort to deadly force as the immediate response to something. We have to train our officers, and I can say this because I have been an officer a long time, and it was very difficult for me to work in a community that looked like me and to address people. And I mean, when I say it was difficult, because I knew there was an apprehension. Now she's a police officer, but I wanted people to understand that I'm still Marion. I'm still the same person who grew up in this neighborhood. I'm still that same person, which means, yes, I still want to go home to my family. So when there is a situation and it is escalating, I use the gift of gab to try to bring that situation down. And that's what we have to train our officers to do. You talked about the verbal judo. That used to be the thing to do, is to send your officers to the verbal judo training. That way they can learn to talk a situation down. We have to provide our officers with tools, and those tools involve starting with your presence being there and talking with them. Just because the law says that we can take a certain amount of force does not necessarily mean that we should take that amount of force.
Certainly.
Thank you. Over here, Kim?
Yes. You mentioned that there was a 50-person panel that comes across the spectrum of the city. There's a coalition of these people sitting right here. Are any of you on that committee by any chance?
No.
None of you?
No.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I was supposed to answer that question.
All right. And then you mentioned something, Mr. Higgins, that the citizens group that was mostly toothless. What are you planning on doing to activate that so it's better?
So I'll try to be real quick. Really, the Civilians Review Board here in Dallas is one of the only ones that has subpoena power in the country, right? But that subpoena power is locked inside of procedures, right? First of all, 7 of the review board members have to agree that something is worthy of subpoenaing an officer, right? If they approve it, then it has to be approved by a technical advisory committee, which is made up of basically people who have served in law enforcement have served in law enforcement for 10 or more years. So we're talking about ex-cops, right? Or people who have worked in law enforcement. There's a advisory committee of 3 people that have to approve as well. Then, if they get past that hurdle, the city council also has to approve it as well. So that's why the Civilian Review Board here in Dallas has never subpoenaed an officer. We pulled up a records request on that, and there has been none. They have no records of any They have no records of any of their recommendations leading to any disciplinary action or any subpoenas of any officer.
Sounds like something needs to change there. Yes, young man.
Okay, well, I have a question, because this is...
Stand up so we can hear you.
All right, so I've been to a few panels, and I heard you say a deputy, and I heard also another officer say that, they get it, they have black sons. Well, to me, therein lies the problems, but then they go ahead and talk about transparency. Well, the thing with transparency is they keep, I keep hearing being introduced as the camera bill. I understand that right now it's a shell bill, but, it's going to pass as is. So the shell bill says that with the body camera, that if it's a non-confrontational interaction, then they are allowed to cut the camera off. So what I'm saying is right now, all the transparency is internal. And I don't understand with officers who are black and say that they get it, because you said it tonight, and was it Brown at Friendship, he said it as well. To me, therein lies the problem. Why won't y'all have more of an initiative to try to get the bad police officers out of there rather than working to protect them?
I haven't read the stats, but I can say that my understanding is that Chief Brown is likely to fire more people than a whole lot of other chiefs. But that was something that has to be researched to be confirm, but we do try to read bad apples. And there's been days when he's fired 5 and 6 people in one day, so we do. Secondly, when it comes to body cams, the bill, what they're trying to do, and I don't think the bill is going to pass as written, because there's always, once it goes to the other side of the aisle, then always there's going to be changes. But at the end of the day, but the legislation is not to write policy. No law is created to be a policy. So Chapter 9, law, means that you can shoot a fleeing felon. BPD policy does not allow you to shoot a fleeing felon. And so this is part of the solution, I mean, it's part of the problems we're having today, right? We're talking about people being shot in the back. And so our policy does not allow that. However, the law does. So they're not meant to be the same. The law is meant to be a guideline. Our policy will not match that. And so that is one of the things that one of these committees will be tasked with is, here's our shell policy now, within the guidelines of the law. And then what exactly do we want the DPD to say? I don't think the DPD is going to say you can have a public interaction and turn that camera off. I believe what will occur, and that's it. It's not written, so it's all speculation. No, I'm thinking any public conference. I'm thinking some say they want the camera on 8 hours. We're not going to leave the camera on, in my opinion. We won't write a policy saying you leave the camera on while you sit in the car having a conversation with your partner. That's a whole 8 hours. That makes no sense. But anytime you get out to contact someone, whether it's confrontational or not, you need to turn that on. Whether it's a police call, whether it's being flagged down by a traffic wreck, or whatever that case may be, I believe the camera will be on. That's at least what I'll be recommending for my half. Now, what will come out of that, I don't know.
Comment?
Yeah, I just want to respond to Mr. Hale's position.
Stand up. Speak up.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Hale's response in terms of Chief Brown firing 6 officers and things of this nature. A lot of times when an officer is hired, I just wanted to bring forth the notion that they're immediately hired back by the city manager's office.
And that's not our fault.
And the second thing, I want to respond to what you stated, because I thought you brought something very interesting out. I personally think that we would never get those type of reforms through the city council. I think it's going to have to be a citywide referendum that's going to have to bring about putting stronger teeth on the severe review board. That is something that we very well do need, and we need you people to help us do that. So I just want to say that.
So aren't you glad you're here in North Dallas telling all these people this? Okay.
That's a question.
Carol.
After Ferguson, there were some reports on the radio that actually black police officers are just slightly less likely to shoot than white police officers. So if that's the case, it doesn't seem like just having diversity in a police department is going to cure this problem, and I wonder what is going to cure the problem. I see you shaking your heads. Do you have any answers?
Yes, certainly. I think continuing. So as you all know, many times, like I just said, that's part of our effort to recruit closer to the Metroplex. So as an example, we recruit folks from Indiana, New York, whatever. Do they have ownership in your community? Because they're not from here, right? So while
they don't move here either. They live in the suburbs.
which is my point. And so if you have no real tie to the communities that you're policing, no real tie, it's different than where you're getting your check and then running home. I live in Oak Cliff. I live near Big T Bazaar. I'm embedded in the community, and I always have been and always will be. And so, of course, I'm going to have a different perspective of my city. And so I believe that as we draw in closer, as much as we can, getting people that are at least from the Metroplex as much as possible, then they're going to have a better tie. Rather than get here, get a job, and then go back to Michigan. Get here, get a job, and go back to California when they start hiring. And do those things. And so that's part of that effort, is to make sure we have those better ties. And then, again, continue to have these dialogues, having more than just executives in meetings like this, and having everybody be engaged with everybody. We've got to continue to talk and continue to dialogue, and that's what's so important about these functions.
Thank you. Young woman back there? Yes.
I guess I want to ask about the two-tier system that law enforcement seems to have, because if I was to shoot an abusive partner, I would still have to go to trial and face the death penalty. If I was sitting in a car while someone robbed a store and they were killed, I would still be under Texas law of parties able to face the death penalty. So an officer who admits to shooting someone doesn't ever face trial and definitely never sees the same consequences as a civilian. So I guess I want people to explain why they think that's fair if you are policing a community and you don't have to suffer the same consequences that they do. You're not meeting them on equal terms. You're meeting them as someone who doesn't play by the rules that you make them play by.
First, I will let DA address some of that, but part of that is we have shootings every day where people do not go to jail. They do not get indicted. They simply go to a grand jury, just like if someone invades your home and you shoot them. That is a shooting. Okay? We don't put those folks in jail that night. They can plead the fifth that night. We do bring them down, interview them, and then we refer it to the grand jury. They may never see trial, may never go to jail. Domestic violence, it does occur where they do not go to jail and never see a trial. So it does occur with regular citizens. Does it occur at the same rate? I would certainly say not. But at the end of the day, it does occur. Not every citizen that shoots somebody goes to jail. Not every citizen that shoots somebody gets indicted or sees a trial. It does not occur that way.
Let me add something here. When if Changa and I get in a battle over a card game and he shoots me, that's a terrible crime, right? Or let me say I shot him, you know. It's really non-violent, you know. I'm not. The person who does that is not authorized to use deadly force. A police officer is given a gun and a badge. That's his authorization to use deadly force if necessary to protect us or to protect himself. And when he misuses deadly force, he breaks that contract. And if they do it enough, it breaks, like I say, the whole social contract is broken. And there's a lot of horrible consequences from it. But he doesn't suffer them. But the good cop, the good detective who's trying to solve a crime in the same community where Changa's brother just got shot and no one will talk to him because he's with the frickin' police department, he suffers. And that crime goes unsolved. So this ripples up through the society. It's not just like somebody that you would never care about, like who had PCP in his system and gets killed and must have been doing something wrong. That's not the only person affected. When a police officer shoots someone, he does it in your name. He does it in my name. There's a third seat at that funeral. And it's the public. And we have an interest when a police officer shoots someone that's greater than if I shoot Changa in a card game. It's greater than that. And it means more to society and it ripples through the society more. And that's why it's more important. And that's why when we say, hey, we want to stop the police from killing people in the community, and you say, well, why don't you do something about black on black crime? Well, it's not the same thing. You know, if you're trying to cure cancer and somebody says, well, hey, diabetes is a good disease, how come you're not trying to work on that? It's not the same thing. These killings are different because an officer is authorized by you, me, and the mayor to do this until he breaks it. And that's why, for instance, the silence of the mayor on this is pretty dead.
And can I say something to that? It's a theater going on here. It's an orchestra of things that go on in this city, right? From the media that made sure to tell you about Clinton Allen having PCP in his system. They never told you what the level of PCP was in his system.
I got it from the coroner, though.
Yeah, you did. But they didn't go back, and when they knew that there were people who had notarized statements that saw this shooting, they didn't go interview those people. But they were, they told you about how he had PCP in his system and how he struggled, right? So our media also continues on with this idea of who we are. Then we have elected officials in what we call the hunting zones, in the hunting zone zip codes and districts in this city, who have been quiet as church mouses. And I'm talking about mainly our black and brown elected officials that represent parts of this city who have not stepped up and said anything. I even have one of them tell me, hey, this is a tough issue. You're not going to get any of us to come out on it because we're also worried about getting the DPA endorsements, right? That we can't come out and say anything about this issue without looking like we're anti-police. So we also have a mayor who goes on and on about growing south, goes on and on about being a man and domestic violence, but has not said anything about any of these shootings publicly, right? And so it's a circle that's going around, right? And so then we have the community. I actually work at the Dallas Morning News. I don't work in the editorial department, but I watch the way that the system works in concert with each other to wash this stuff away. To where we're sitting around talking about if this guy had PCP in his system, when it's people that walking around and smoking pot that may have levels of PCP that he had in his system, in their system. So, you know, you gotta challenge it. You have to challenge it.
And let me say on the record, I agree with about 90% of what Mr. Fullinwider just said.
We know that y'all are activists, right? So you write letters and you have voices to be heard. Okay.
Out of these police officers, and I'm talking to Goodson and Mr. Hale, out of these police officers that have shot someone and killed someone that was unarmed, how many of those have gone back and either shot another person or had another disciplinary action on the police force that are still there today? A second problem occurred with that same officer, and they're still there today. Do you know what that is, Mr. Goodson?
Well, I would say, from speaking, I think Clark Stoller may have had some issues and where he lied on the. Right. I know as it relates to what happened with Clinton Allen, Officer Clark Stoller, badge 9514, was found to do something out of line of conduct of an officer where he ran over an individual. Mr. Fullinwider, correct me if I'm incorrect. And then afterwards, the incident happened with Clinton Allen on March 10th, 2013. So I think that what happened with Mr. Allen probably wouldn't have happened if Chief Brown, if he's so quick to fire officers, if he's so quick to have a track record where he won't handle misconduct with officers, if he had gotten rid of Clark Stoller at that particular time, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion about Clinton Allen. So I think that's kind of an answer to your question.
Yes.
Yeah. My question is for Ms. White. I think that we've talked about the local reaction of police and law enforcement to parts of the communities where there's more poverty and more crime and more, more prejudice. I don't want to say justifiable prejudice, but my particular hot button is the Texas prison system, which is so brutal and brutalizes people that when they are released, a disproportionate number of African Americans who go back out on the street, who are then that much more brutal and prompt the police to be more suspicious in general. And how do you feel about that? How do you work?
I think that's another program. You can talk to them personally afterwards. I want to get. We got 2 more questions, and then gentleman back here.
And I can answer your question. The officer that shot my uncle, Galen Alexander, March 10, 2010, he actually has 2 killings under his belt. And she's, I guess, Renee Quintil, whatever. This officer has several different things on his record of officer-involved shootings. One of the things I wanted to point out was I heard the deputy chief talk about this committee that the chief of police have created. And I heard one of the part that he said they have influenced the community. And I hear this a lot of times when it comes to events like this, that they have put the community inside of it. But the people that has been sacrificing their life out here, raising awareness of this, we don't know anything about these committees unless they come and tell us about them. And they say that we have asked people that has been involved with these different things, And when we look around, we're all here and we're like, who are you talking about? And the state senator said something about that the other time, and he tells us things. So I tell people all this to be aware of, is that they can tell us anything. But I wanted to ask a quick question. Is there any way, because I know I do a lot of open records requesting, they send me through all of the bull crap protocol. Is there any way that we can get the information to see who's representing the community in this panel? Because I know that GPA is here to address their issues and the police management. Is there any way that we can see who's addressing the community?
I have the list.
She got the list.
Okay.
Because
we have a lot of people that's out here in the streets and the communities, and none of us have the proper voice in these type of discussion that goes on with us, and we're sacrificing our life and our time and things like that to raise awareness towards these issues, and we don't have no voice when you come along with different things like that or whatever. So that's the main issue right there at our hand. That's just like with the body camera bill. Senator Royce West said that he asked the community leaders to come to him, but everybody that he had up there that introduced this body camera bill, but he wanted to introduce community transparency. Everybody else there was police enforcement, police associations. Not one community organization was up there. And that's what goes on in our politics today. They don't ask the community what they are their voice. They put who they want to put on there, and it's not people advocating for the community to better police enforcement. And then what they try to do is make us feel like we're against all cops, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get those bad apples out of this system and correct the relationship so that we can go forward in this issue. But unless we go through the propaganda, like the media marker it up and all that type of stuff, and all this different things, like when the officer-involved shooting in New York, they start calling me, asking me about officer-involved shooting. That didn't have nothing to do. We're not going to go on this mockery and these different things. We need to, everybody, it happens to everybody. We need to take our politicians and our people, elected officials, the people in place, and hold them accountable for the actions and what they're doing, because they can tell us anything. And what they are doing now today is telling us anything, and we're just going out the door with it and thinking we're being transparent. Because I promise you, everybody that's on that community list are not one person that has walked or marched or did anything to hold a sign to raise awareness of police brutality. And that's the issue right there.
I'm going to give you this list. I'm going to put it back there so you can look at it. I got this from the police department, I think. This, because I asked about it. And you're right. There's not much there. There's lots of Boy Scouts and religious groups and things like that. But these people have not, they're not part of it. No. Okay, we're going to need to wind this up. I'm sure we have lots of questions. We can stay here all night, but I'm going to ask everyone to kind of give us a closing statement and just tell us what you want us to come away with.
DCOC, Dallas Community Organizers for Change, wants you to support the federal complaint that has been filed. We would like for you to support more transparency as it relates to internal affairs that Mr. Higgins spoke about. And thirdly, we desire to support the new Civilian Review Board here in the city of Dallas that will have more teeth. We think that these are the most important issues, okay? These are the most important issues. We think that consent decree is likely something that needs to happen here in this city. We definitely think that withholding of funding is something that needs to happen in this city. And we think that we need to be able to hold public officials more accountable. And so that's primarily our position that we're taking, and we definitely appreciate you very much for allowing us to come here and speak.
Thank you.
First of all, my email for my clock stars is vernon.hale@dpd.dallascityhall.com. And I have a true open door policy, and all these folks know they can call me or talk to me anytime, email me anytime, and I will respond. So that's first. Second, thank you for letting me be here. Third, thank you for all of you, the folks that are out here trying to hold us accountable, because if there is no check and balance, trust me, I understand what will occur, and it will be chaos, and we don't want chaos. We are not a police state. So my biggest, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but the biggest thing we can do, especially in our own communities, is one, vote, because we don't have a good voter turnout. Two, stop complaining.
The criminal justice system as a whole, and the process is continuing to evolve. And as long as good people come to the table to talk about how to fix situations, we're going to be much better off than we were years ago. We'll be much better off, hopefully 10 and 20 years from now, than the conversations we have today. But it's important that the whole community, law enforcement and non-law enforcement, and everybody be involved so we can change the perception. It is important that when little kids see the police, and I don't care black, white, or brown, and I don't care what your zip code is, that they think positively that they're here to help me and not here to hurt me. And that is what our job is going to be. It's going to be my job as a DA, and the DA's job as the DA, and the police officer's job, and these community leaders out here to change the perception of law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And only if we work together can we do that. And the DA's office is ready to be a partner with anybody out there who's willing to help change and make reform. And so we're open. And that's what she wants everyone to know, that we're open for discussion, we're open for transparency, and we're open to making Dallas County just as good as it can be. I said, is it Changa? We were talking earlier, and I said, you know what? One thing about Lady Justice is she wears a scarf for a reason, and that's because it shouldn't matter. Right is right, and wrong is wrong, and fair is fair, and what's not fair is not fair. And so we need to keep that in mind as we go out there and continue this conversation everywhere we can, so that we can't have Dallas not be a negative statistic that they talk about, but the city and the county that we all want it to be.
I want to first of all, on behalf of the Sheriff's Department, thank you all for presenting this program tonight and inviting us to participate in the program. I want to say to Mr. Fullinwider, you apologized earlier for being argumentative. I don't think that apology was necessary. And the reason I don't is because I think that this is what it's going to take. You talk about, well, we can have diversity training all day and all night long, but until we start to get into a room, have conversations that are real conversations that cause us to help understand one another and where the other is coming from, this is what it's going to take. And so thank you all for the program tonight. And I just encourage all of you to get involved. You've heard it before. Get involved. Be a part of the process. You know that saying, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And so we can either all be successful together or we can all perish together. I hope that our choice will be that we will all come together and reach our common goal, because we all have a common goal. Our objective is common. And so I hope that that's what we will continue to do, is to have these types of dialogues. And those that hurt feelings, it's okay, because when we walk out of the room, we walk out of the room with a better understanding of one another. Right? And so thank you again for being on.
Thanks everybody for being here, especially that anyone who disagrees with me. I'm always glad to say that. I want to say I hope you all will contact Mothers Against Police Brutality online. You can just Google it, and you can find us online and on Facebook. And our email address is just mothersagainstpolicebrutality@gmail.com. There are the problem of police violence against the public is a nationwide problem, a state problem, and a local problem. It seems to me that one of the ways we could have fewer shootings of unarmed people is if policemen were tried for that, for doing that. You know, a grand jury is not even a trial, like Lena said. It's just, is there enough evidence to have a trial? I think that when we try to get a technical fix for a problem that's not exactly technical, like the cameras, I'm all for them. But there was quite a good video of Eric Garner being choked to death on a New York street, and it didn't seem to sway the grand jury there, you know, very much. I think the prosecution of officer-involved shootings is something that we really need, I'm going to say, a federal solution on. What I mean is, when the states in the South were violating egregiously the civil rights of black people in the 60s, we had a federal response. And it seems to me that there's too many officer-involved shootings, but there's not so many that we couldn't have the U.S. Attorney appoint a special prosecutor for each one. And those prosecutors would have special training, just like death penalty defense lawyers have special training. So that would be pretty good. The last thing I want to say is that just keep in mind that the police officer is out there to serve and protect you. Everything he does, he's doing it in your name. He or she is doing it in your name. If you don't like what's happening with the police department, just remember, you are implicated. You gave him the gun and the badge. You gave him the authorization. And it is up to the public to tell, through our public officials and however we can, that we do not want our policemen to shoot unarmed people. We want them to talk down mentally ill people, not shoot them down. Okay? We want to calm them down, not shoot them down. And we want them to try to de-escalate a situation rather than go quickly to deadly force, which seems to be a pattern. And we also think it would be a good idea if you have to shoot someone, you don't have to empty your gun on them. You could shoot them twice in the leg, and they'd probably stop running toward you and scare you. So accountability is a very important thing here. And the other thing I want you to realize is that this does affect policing in a very negative way. And when the cops that do not like this, when the cops that don't like their racist partner come forward and get those guys off the force, they're going to find their job gets a lot easier. Because people will talk to you if they know you and trust you and think you're for justice. But if you're covering up for the rogue cops in the department, and none of them are ever held accountable, even if they shoot an unarmed man in the back, then that hurts police investigations. That's why being a snitch is worse than trying to bring a criminal to justice in many, many communities. So thanks again for coming to stay involved.
I'd just like to say also thank you for having us. I think it's really great that you guys took enough time to put this panel together, research the issues, and find out who the real players were. So many times I go to panels like this, and they got the wrong people up there, but you got the right people, and that's great. I would just say that, you know, Dallas is at a tipping point to where we can actually, as citizens, we know that this is a national problem. It's a crisis. If you still don't believe that, you know, it's kind of unfortunate. You probably never believe it. But if you do, we need you to start speaking up. Your church, your group can write letters to elected officials and let them know. Letter writing campaigns. You can help us. Dallas Police Reform Organizing Project, we work with all the other groups as well. So, you know, we need researchers. We need people who like to read stuff. Long, boring, open records requests. But we need people who know how to take numbers and manipulate them into data. We need attorneys who can provide technical assistance to these organizations from anywhere from making sure they're holding protests legally to helping get people out of jail all the way to helping us rewrite some policies. So I can give you my information if anybody's interested after to keep in contact. And the biggest thing is to begin to challenge the idea that nothing is wrong, right? Because there is a problem here, and you cannot be silent, right? And you need to get involved in whatever way you can. So.
For being with us, and I have to tell you that I screwed up, and I'm going to have to figure out how to remedy this. I had a North Dallas, Texas Democratic Women Donkeys with Attitude coffee mug for each of you, and you're home. But I'm going to get them to you. Okay. All right.
So, but could you mail? You have all our contact information.
I do. I will.
Could you mail it to this group?
Yes, I will.
Put it on the
website. I will put it on the website.
So they can easily find us. Yeah.
I will absolutely do that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying.
Your voice heard in a meeting that I'm in, send it to me and I will make sure it is heard. I
How
can't
about
make
we get
sure.
on that coalition?
Huh?
I want on that coalition.
I don't want to, but I'll let the man know.